Welcome everyone, and we're excited to have you for the masterclass Aesthetics of Solo and Group Choreography. And it's my distinct pleasure to invite my dear friend and brilliant artist, Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi dancer, co-founder and artistic director of Prakriti Dance, Kasi Aysola. Kasi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amaya, for that introduction, and thank you to IDEA and the Resilidance Festival team for having me be a part of this session and a few other sessions as well. The topic that I was asked to give this masterclass about was aesthetics of solo dance versus group dance or in the realm of choreography. So I thought I would begin just to give you an idea of the structure that I'm going to be using today in the presentation. Is I'm going to be using, because we're obviously virtual, and to talk about group dance, group choreography versus solo choreography, and especially to conduct a masterclass, we'd need to have group people together, and we'd have to have bodies and choreographers. So I decided to use video clips of work that I have done, and kind of give you a little sample of how I think about aesthetics and how I approach choreography and why certain artistic impulses happen in certain ways. So I'll begin with just defining the word aesthetics, because I think that's something that gives an overarching feel for why we dance the way we dance, why we think about dance the way we think about dance, and why we move the way we move, and why we have affinities towards certain things as artists versus others, and that's why we have so much diversity. Aesthetics is defined as concerned with beauty or the appreciation of beauty, as well as a set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artistic movement. Aesthetics, to me, are handed down through us from our teachers, and along the way, we add to that foundation they have given us from our own experiences and tastes. The beauty of Indian dance is that even though aesthetic principles are set, they lay differently on each body. And I want to stress that because when we talk about things like style or bani or vari, um, all of these things are basically aesthetic parameters that our teachers have passed down generationally or lineage wise. But that aesthetic principles, those parameters with how we move our bodies, how we approach dance, they're always going to be different body to body, which is why I put an emphasis on the fact that aesthetic principles lay differently on bodies. Each body interprets them differently and personally. Intrinsically, this creates space for more things to be included, adapted, and changed within a certain aesthetic practice. So innately, we do fall into categories when we talk about aesthetics of this is my school's aesthetic, this is my teacher's aesthetic, this is my lineage's aesthetic. But because the body is individualistic and the way the Indian art forms are taught and performed, they will never be carbon copied. And that in itself is allowing space for addition and expansion and evolution within aesthetic practices. Um, Anyways, so I continue on by talking about aesthetics are always based on ideation and reasoning of some sort. I'll give a good example of this. In Bharatanatyam, as well as in Kuchipudi, we have something called a Natyarambam, where we keep our arms lifted to the sides. Usually that's the hallmark of Angashuddham, or body awareness, body correctness as it translates. And when you look at styles or different aesthetic practices, the Angashuddham and the Natyarambam is held very differently. But there's a reasoning for each school, each teacher, each artist, you could say, and their lineage that's been passed down to them for why they hold that Angashuddham a certain way, why that Natyarambam is flatter or more brisk or more arced or more straight. Those are all aesthetic things that are based off of reasonings. And so that's why I think we have to always think about why we do what we do when we physically approach dance, whether it be in solo context or group, because those reasonings are what propel our physical movement. If, for instance, a certain style wants to be more rigid, they may create the Angashuddham a certain way. And if a certain style wants to be more fluid or graceful, they may create the body lines a certain way. So aesthetics are really based off of reasoning and ideation. And as we go through the clips that I have set up for you guys, you'll start to see that it's the main thing that pushes choreography for me, especially, is thought process and why I'm doing what I'm doing, and also structure. So when we have structures in place, those structures help me to think about why I'm creating what I'm creating. But I always dwindle down aesthetics back to the reasoning why I'm doing something physically or why I want to see and envision something a certain way. Choreography principles. For me, there's a few choreographic principles that I always think about when I'm creating a choreography, be it solo or group or duet or an array of different types of choreography. These principles are things that are kind of hallmarks within how I think I have to hit these kind of goalposts that help me to develop choreography. And those are musicality, juxtaposition, ideation, and predictability. The first thing for me is when you're dancing with music and creating off of music, the intuitive understanding of the music for me has to be soaked in. And the music, in a lot of ways, when we talk about musicality, it's not just about executing the music, or executing the talam, or executing the cross rhythms that are put over the dance, the music, but it's more about understanding the music deeply to be able to layer and manipulate and then create on top of that baseline. So that's what I mean by musicality. Juxtaposition is something for me that's really important also, where we're constantly seeing up and down, up and down. And I think a lot of people who've worked with me, especially in Prakriti, I'm always talking about up and down, tonality. For me, choreography should never be flat. It should never be one tone or one-sided. And even within a certain sequence, even just saying, taking a swaram or a swara passage or a jati, within one line, there has to be tonality. And that's what also leads into the next thing, which is predictability. When you have that tonality of up and down in choreography, it allows you to not be perceivable to the audience. For me especially, because I think like my aesthetic practice and the lineage of aesthetic understanding that I come from deals with a lot of rhythm and punch and dynamism, and that also feeds into being predictable. So I always think to myself, is this something that you can predict, or is it going to come spontaneously and continually bring about something different and unpredictable? And all these three principles boil down to ideation, which comes as the base thing we talked about, aesthetics being born from thought process and reasoning. So when you have ideation, then the musicality, the juxtaposition, and this idea of being a little spontaneous or unpredictable is very apparent. But when you lack the ideation, I think the choreography then becomes either structural, where you're following a structure that exists, or it just becomes predictable and not as personal to the choreographer. And I want to just on the onset say that I think choreography is not something that I was uh, given. I think it was born with a creative spirit, but I was so privileged to have many people in my life, including my teachers, who would see this creative spirit and nature and innate feeling or ability inside of me and would tell me to choreograph. And so that's where ideation really gets shaped, is when you have people allowing you and guiding you and helping you to move forward and create your pieces. I'm just going to talk a little bit about group work and how I think about group work versus solo. And I said, in group work, the body becomes the prime importance of what you're creating, in the sense where I'm always thinking about how are we moving the bodies? Why are those bodies there? How many bodies do I want? Who am I working with? What are their heights? What are their body types? How does the energy of that group work together? And that's another thing we can talk about a little later. But am I placing people in formation or in the performance space due to symmetry, or is it some other reasoning? Is it um, asymmetrical? Is it something that's supposed to feel balanced or not balanced? Those are things I constantly think about when working with multiple bodies. And how do multiple bodies evoke the idea that I'm trying to convey? I think some things are suited really well for group work and some things are suited for solo work. And that's one of the sections I have if we get to it in time. And in solo work, you're really painting the imagery that you're trying to create on a blank space using one body. Whether it's whether you're carving shapes in the space, cutting the space with your energy, or bringing to life scenery or characters. The job in a solo dance is to bring out and visualize whatever you're trying to say through your body as well as your imagination as an artist. And just another thing I always stress, especially for creative dancers who are creating work, imagination is essential. And imagination is where ideation comes from. So without being able to imagine and to let your mind soar free, I really think it's very difficult to create beautiful ideas, which then lead you into why you create the pieces and why your aesthetics are the way they are. It really stems from this, imagination of what you envision your dance to be. So, the first piece I wanted to show you guys was a piece from a group production called Ambashi Gandhi. And Ambashi Gandhi is a Puranic story about Amba from the Mahabharata. And just to cut things short, she's somebody that's kind of forgotten, but is so pivotal in the Mahabharata. And her spirit is untamable, it's wild, and she goes through a turbulent lifestyle. So the first clip I'm going to show you is a short Pushpanjali, which is so the first section I want to talk about, sorry to jump ahead, but is Nritta. Nritta is abstract movement. So I'm going to show you two segments, group work and solo, using Nritta. And this piece is from Ambashi Gandhi, like I was talking about, where you're going to see it's a Pushpanjali. And you know what? We'll talk about it after. Here we go. So in that piece, the whole it goes on to the drama of her life and whatever happens to her and the message that I'm trying to get across. But because I remember her life being so turbulent, and this quote from the Bhagavad Gita talking about how the lotus emerges from the murky and turbulent water, regardless of that, we as human beings should always be resilient despite the dirty murkiness of life. That's why the whole piece and the music, even the way Ramya, who composed the music, who's here, the way we worked on the music was it has to feel uncomfortable and there has to be change in pace and raga and things like that. And so that's why even the nritta portion takes on that spontaneous, unpredictable pace. Now, going to the next clip that I want to show to you guys is a Pushpanjali, a straight Pushpanjali like this one, but this is from Amargam, and it's actually a film song, which I think IDEA also has as their promo song from Dance Like a Man. And I'll just share that clip and then we can talk about it right after. So just to give you an idea of group and the reasoning behind why I created that Pushpanjali, and then how to approach it as well as a solo piece in a Margam setting. Okay, so in the end of this, here I want to talk about musicality specifically because that's something that really drives me as a choreographer. And you can see that the difference, especially with the group choreography Pushpanjali versus this one, is this has so much symmetry, which is comfortable, which is where I go back to the structural understanding of the Margam and the basic format that I learned from, and also the natural right, left that happens in Bharatanatyam especially, doing something on the right, doing something on the left. And with group work, that may be okay, but it also may change. So it's really understanding the context of what you're creating for and why you're creating it. And also there's a lot more ability for me to like develop many more versions of the rhythm in one musical line in this versus the other one because my purpose was different in creating this piece versus the other. The next section that I wanted, before I continue on to this, I had one more thing to talk about was the idea of Vallinam Mellinam. They're choreographic kind of principles as well as principles while you dance, but they do apply to choreography. Vallinam is when something is hard or very beatfully, it comes with a hardness, a fullness. And then Mellinam is softer. So when I think about choreography too, it comes back to that idea of tonality that I was talking about, something being hard, something being soft, as well as when you're creating movements within your aesthetic, the idea of sarika and minaka. Sarika is something that has more substance. It's more rigorous in the sense, if we talk about adavus, it's like, more full adavus. And minaka are decorative. They're glamorous things that are decorations that you add. So that sense of balance and going up and down and having those juxtapositions is what I think creates harmonious choreography. And that's what I always try to achieve within group as well as in solo. The next section that I wanted to talk about was taking the same piece and adapting it into different formats. So this is a tarana or a tilana that I choreographed. And it basically, I'm going to show you the same clip done with a solo, a duet, and a group version of the same piece. And then we can talk about it and why, why the differences might be there and also why the similarities might be there in the sense of why some things are kept the same. And it's just a portion of that, of the piece. So definitely music, like I said, is one of the main driving principles of choreography for me. So even so all those little technicalities that come within the song, that circularity in the music itself is why those movements came into my brain, because I seeped myself into the song and the rhythm and everything, the ragam of the song. And that's where something inside of me, those impulses that were given to me structurally and foundationally from my teachers that are inside of my body, because they're, those aesthetics are part of how I dance, then they emerge because that musicality speaks to me in a certain way. I'm going to now show you a duet of the same piece in the same section, and you can just see some things are kept the same in the way we both do things within unison, but some things are changed in order to kind of personify some of the shapes that I'm trying to create, or within the roundness of certain parts of the music, how we kind of circle each other in order to bring that into the space and to make you feel that circularity or that linearness or the sharpness or something rounded. So different feelings are kind of put into a visualized character of two bodies. So you can see we pretty much do the same thing. It's unison, but there's a reason, because the feeling of that tarana felt correct to keep it that way. But then there's that cat and mouse where we look at each other and follow each other and then run around each other, which creates this kind of circular feeling that comes within the music as well, and the movement lends itself to that. And finally, now the same exact section done with a group. So you can see some things are kept the same, but like using all the people in a line moving forward and back, it gives like a swinging type of feel, which the movement itself has that kind of feel. So it's group work for me is not just about showing something different and having variety, but sometimes it's about really getting into the aesthetics of the movement and letting those come alive in the way you put them onto the body. So sometimes it's about the idea, but sometimes when you already, like in this section, we're talking about the same piece that comes from Amalgam and done in different formats, then you have to think about the intentionality that the piece was created with, because you're not creating the group work for the group or for a certain idea. You're placing this already existing piece on top of a group. So that's the reason why I chose to do a lot of unison here and symmetry, where we all kind of do similar things but face different ways, because it had a sense of harmony. So that was because the piece itself has that balanced right left, doing things twice, like in a solo Margam piece. So keeping that integrity of the Margam piece. The next section I have for you guys is about dramatization, which right now we've been dealing more with abstract movement, nritta, more just about the dance and the energy and the virtuosic part of the dance. But now we're going to go into the virtuosic part of the dance, which is emotive. And this is going to be two sections I chose for you. One from a Varnam, and it's going to be a Sanchari, and the other is going to be from the dance drama I talked about, Ambashi Gandhi. And we'll start with the Varnam, and then we can talk about it afterwards. So before we go into that, I just wanted to note the reason that I chose this piece is because each video segment has a different reason why the movements were chosen and the idea to portray certain stories or Puranas were chosen. So we'll get into that after it. But there's a reason why. So in this, because like we talked about format and structure, the Madhyam itself has a format, the Vadnam has a format, and the main component here that you follow in choreographing is the Sahityam, the lyrics. There are words, there's a thought process already been given to you. So when we're talking about why I chose to do the Shirasagara Madanam and saying, oh Shiva, it's a love song to Shiva, but why would I say do a story about him churning the ocean and saving the devas and asuras? I mean, it's kind of irrelevant, right? But if you look at the ideation, the Naika is saying, Vinara Sri Tanjapuri Velayun Ma Brihadisha. So she's saying, listen to me, O Lord from Tanjapuri, you're the great Brihadisha, right? So in this case, because historically our tradition allows us to take words and isolate them and elaborate on those words. That's a structure that's built into this aesthetic understanding of how to choreograph solo items, especially vadnams. I took the word vinara, listen to me, because he listened to the devas and the asuras when they called him, when the poison was emitted from their churning of the ocean, and he saved them immediately. But the naika then goes to connect back and say, when my heart is churning for you and about to snap, you're nowhere to be found. Is this fair that you did this for them, but you didn't do it to me? So it's kind of the conventions that exist, which is why I chose this mythological story to put into the love song. I mean, or we could just go ahead and interpret the line the way it is and then move on to the next line. But that's where the choreographic ideas and your creative ability comes through, and then your aesthetics lend itself, like how you move your body, how many lines you're going to take. Those are all the principles that fall within your ideation under the idea of why you chose to include that and incorporate that. But in the next section, I'm going to show you, it's the group piece from Ambashi Gandhi. There's no lyrics, and there's nothing that's driving the choreography. There's no structure in place. There's a storyline. So we'll watch that, and then we can talk about it really quick. So in this, because it's a drama and there's a whole narrative that's happening, and there's characters and people and bodies are taking on each different character. There's no one person playing multiple imaginary roles, right? I chose, originally this wasn't there in the production. This is after Amba gets rejected by her lover and she goes into like a full breakdown. And so originally it wasn't there, but I felt that as visually, you weren't feeling her inside thoughts. And because there's no structure in place, that's where we bring in the other dancers to feel like there's doors closing on her, metaphorically. So in this instance, it was metaphor that was driving me to put the other dancers around her and attack her, even though it's not a physical, real thing. It's inside of her brain. And after that, even the lighting and all of the way we did it was to blur out the outside dancers and to highlight the central one. So it feels like an internal struggle. In comparison to the Vadnam, which is very much driven by that lyric and by the reasoning and the need to follow structure, this was completely outside of structure. And that's why the physical body kind of personifies, or the physical bodies personify how Amba feels on the inside, and then they disappear and it goes into a monologue about her and her plight. So I think, going back to ideation, that's always like the main thing for me is, what is the idea thinking? What am I thinking about? What am I trying to convey? And are there structures that can help me do this? Or do I have to go and find a new structure that doesn't exist? The last section, I think we have 5 minutes, so I'll go for it. Before we go into questions, is about why I feel compelled sometimes to only do things in a group format or in a solo format. So some things just feel correct as a group piece, and I feel do not or cannot. That's my personal feeling, not that they can't. Of course, everything's possible in dance and art, but as a personal feeling, some things cannot be done without a group, and some things I think should be done as a solo. And those are just, like I said, the aesthetic principles that were handed down to me as my foundation in understanding, how I think about art and how my body functions and my creativity. So the first thing I want to show you was a padam. Padams for me are innately created in order to allow the artist to have thought process within one or two lines. And they're not necessarily always narrative. They don't go linearly necessarily. They can, but when you create padams with multiple people, for me, you lose that craft of being able to develop the character, the nayika, whoever it may be. Not just saying that that's the only format, but whoever it may be, you lose that ability to develop the imaginary and to, like we talked about solo dance, painting a picture for your audience using just one body on the blank space. So I'll show you just a clip of a padam where you see the reaction of a person to another person. So there are two people present, but you only see it through one person. And it's a Saki that goes to call Venkateshwara, the Annamaya Sankirtana, and she ends up falling in love with her lord, or her Alamilamanga's lord, and she kind of has an affair, which becomes problematic later. So it's just a section of it, so you can see why this would not work as well with two people or three people dancing in real time. The beauty is within crafting it alone.
ఇద్దరితమకము ఇటువలేనే ఇద్దరితమకము ఇటువలేనే పొద్దుననే మని పొంగుదమయ్యా ఇద్దరితమకము ఇటువలేనే పొద్దుననే మని పొంగుదమయ్యా ఇద్దరితమకము ఇటువలేనే పొద్దుననే మని పొంగుదమయ్యా ఇద్దరితమకము ఇటువలేనే
So I think that's even in the song, the lyrics of the character are saying from one perspective. So it would be not make sense when she wakes up next to the wrong person and says, "Oh, and have another body lying there." The beauty is the humor, the beauty, the essence of the song is that one voice speaking and you imagining all of these things, and that's the skill of that particular thing of creating a solo padam. The opposite of that would be the next piece I'll show you, which will be my last segment. It's on jellyfish, which is something that has nothing. It doesn't. It's not tied to Indian culture or the ethos of Indian dance or performing art. And so I felt that I could only envision this with group because the audience that I'm portraying or connecting to won't even have any sort of cultural backing to know what a jellyfish is, and I need these bodies and these props in order to bring about the multiplicity of these jellyfish swarming around the ocean. So enjoy. It's one of my favorite pieces.
Sa ba ma ba da ba ma ba da. Sa ba ma ba da ba ma ba da. Sa ba ma ba da ba ma ba da. Pa ma ga ri sa da ri ga ma pa ma pa da pa sa ni sa ri sa ni sa ni pa da pa ma ga ri sa.
So as you can see, I mean, I don't know how else to envision jellyfish without all those people and the distance and all of that. So I just think choreography has been a blessing for me, and I'll end on that note with saying that I know that God gave me a gift of creativity, but if I hadn't had the teachers and the artistry that they gave to me through their dances, through their productions, through their encouragement, I think my aesthetics and my foundation would not have been laid so deeply for me to now build on top of. So I hope that was helpful in talking about solo versus group aesthetics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kashi. That was fantastic to kind of lay everything out, starting with Nritta and going to Natya, and just seeing the videos and hearing you, I think, very clarifying for me. We do have a couple of questions. First one's from Madhuvanti, asking about the process for turning a group choreography into a solo choreography or vice versa. So can you talk about that a little bit?
The process, I mean, it depends, like I said, ideation, right? Did you create the piece for a group and then are you now adapting it to a solo? Because that can be really challenging, especially when you're talking about spacing and how are are you going to portray all the characters, or are you going to take it like a solo format where maybe you're doing one character reacting to multiple in order to build the scene for the audience. But I think I've done both in both directions, where the piece wasn't intended to be for a group but it became a group piece, or the piece was a group piece and then became a solo piece. It just depends on circumstance also. Like sometimes, to be honest, you're presented a certain way, or someone asks you to do something based on something, so you do it for that particular instance, like a performance or something. Or sometimes it's you feel you did something but maybe it didn't work right, then I do a lot of editing and changing of my choreography, which is crucial for me. So sometimes it's more about like changing it and adapting it to what worked better. And also, to be honest, I think the process of adapting something is really about who you are as an artist at that moment. Like we're always changing as artists, and who I was 10 years ago is not who I am today. And so my dance and the pieces that go along with me will change with me, I think. And I'm open to them changing. It's okay with me. So it's really dependent, it's subjective to who I am at that moment as a dancer and then as an artist.
You mentioned space in your response. Can you talk a little bit about how to think about space and space coverage when you're working as a group versus in a solo setting?
Yeah, sometimes we fall into like the typical, we need to cover space, we need to create formation, we need to become dynamic, right? When we have bodies, you don't want to waste the bodies. But then it all boils down back to, what are you trying to convey? If you're doing something about, you know, clouds wafting along in the sky, then you may not want everybody dishum dishum, like running across the stage and doing all these things. But you may want to clump the people in certain areas to create that kind of lull of the, heavy clouds kind of just moseying along. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But if you have something dynamic like a tilana or jatiswaram or something like that, or whatever it may be, or you may want to hit angles and do things that based on the music that are like fun and unpredictable and movement. It really depends on like, it's kind of like, how you dress yourself in the morning. It's based on your mood, right? Like some days you feel like, whatever, so you just kind of don't really go and put that much makeup on or wear a lot of bright colors. But sometimes you just feel alive, so you want to be active and dress yourself a certain way. It's the same with choreography, especially with space, usage of space. It's dependent on what you're trying to get across, I think. But I like space. I like to cover space, and I'm a very dicey kind of person. So I like lots of movement and dynamism when it's appropriate.
I think, and going into the group work that you have done, and I've had the privilege of seeing Ambashi Gandhi and parts of Through Fish Eyes, and what I was really struck by is how you kind of go back and forth between using the group of dancers sometimes as multiple characters,
Right.
and other times as a single organism, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the very exciting areas of classical dance today.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about group and having bodies is that like you can create things that are like real time sometimes. Like in Through Fish Eyes, I didn't show the clip, we didn't have time, but there's a section about a turtle and it having a straw stuck in its nose, and it kind of was like this iconic thing. So I was like, should we show turtles like with our hand? Like, the gestural language wasn't enough. And on that stage, in the way that the piece was being created for that performance, it just felt you were not going to understand it. So I had like one person as the turtle, and then like four other people as the shell and the legs, and the tail, and it just became like larger than life, where you felt like this, it's not like a little turtle you get at Petco. This is like giant turtle, that goes sea turtle, right? So that ability to use the bodies together to create, like, I always think of Master Guy when he does the cows or even the till when they're pulling the till, and you'll have two people front and back wearing a cow. I mean, it's just so genius because he's creating something that's very literal, that's very narrative, and it's actually, the story is playing out in front of you. There's nothing suggestive about it, right? So he has these bodies and he utilizes them so beautifully to bring about this real life in time ability. So I think when you're developing something with group, you have a lot of ability to do things that are physicalized in a lot of ways, but with the solo, it's a lot based on the skill set of the artist and their ability to evoke something in your brain to make you imagine what's happening with them. They don't have all of the bodies to do that, but that's the beauty of that also, is you have to be able to create that for the audience with just yourself, your eyes, and your own body if you're doing drama or narrative or something.
We have another question from Sadhana. In a group dance, is it more important for you to emote, or is it more important in a solo performance because you're under the spotlight?
Both. I especially with Prakriti, I really like pick people and kind of like work with people that I think are strong solo dancers. I think being a strong solo dancer makes you a great group dancer if you were able to work within a group, because you bring something unique to the table. I think in group choreography we always I've seen a lot of times, especially I'm guilty of this too, is trying to unify and clarify and bring everything within a very cookie cutter neat way. But in reality, yes, there is times when you need unison, but you need people who have their own oomph to bring something. And so I think emotion and emotive ability and expression in a group is just as important. And you can see power, not power, but energy play when you have somebody that doesn't dance as much oomph and another person that does. It highlights more in a group. So I think it's just as important as in solo to be deeply seeped in whatever you're trying to convey, not just, oh, I'm in a group so I don't have to dance that great, who's looking at me. And it's not just about formation. The energy, the rapport amongst the people that are dancing together is hugely important. I believe in that. So
Absolutely. Another part that I did want to kind of see if you could dive into a little bit, if we have the time, is you mentioned that the music for one of the clips that you shared was by Ramya, who we also have here today. And how is the choreographic process when you're starting with a concept without preset music, right? And sort of creating it from scratch versus if you're taking a song that already exists and bring that into your dance.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
So if you're working on a project and you're starting from scratch without music, and even that is part of your process, how does that work as opposed to if you're working with an existing song that you're choreographing?
It's what drives you. If you feel like you want to dance about something and you have the ability to dance about something that's not existent, like in the sense of composition, then you have to delve into it and find a way to make that music work for you or make the music for you. So, if something is you're truly passionate about it, which all the pieces I've created are always out of passion, and out of purpose, some sort of deeper purpose for myself, then I have to find a way to do it. So if it means like, oh, even solo pieces, I try not to just pick things because they're cool or it's what's correct. I just feel whatever drives me, I should dance about those things in a solo format or a group. So when you're doing a group piece, a lot of times it's not something that exists, like through fishes is about ocean pollution, or like so many things exist, or but then there are things like, for instance, Annamaya. I love Annamaya and I would love to do a production of him and it's in my brain somewhere, but there's music for that. So how do I now take his music and bridge it with my own ideas and find new music to kind of mix them together? And I think that's where it boils down to, are you really passionate about what you want to do, and are you going to find a way to develop that in, if you have to make music for yourself or find a musician to work with you to create that music, it's based off of if you're really driven to do that idea. Otherwise, there's a plethora of stuff we already have in our repertoires that's phenomenal, musically as well.
Another question we have is from Vaishnavi. You mentioned musicality, tonality, ideation, and predictability as the principles of choreography. Can you elaborate more on them, please?
Yeah, so I these are not principles of choreography for everyone. I mean, choreography, let me put it out there, like this is like cooking. Everybody cooks the way they want to cook and the way they want to savor their food, right? Even if it's, I always talk about sambar is made from mother to daughter, granddaughter, the sambar is different. But sambar is a sambar, right? It exists. So that's, for me, those are the things I over the years, and I'm continuing to understand, are things that matter very deeply to me when I create something. And so that's why I put them as hallmarks and principles. But when I talk about those, they're things that come from the way I learned dance, the pieces I learned, and the pieces that kind of shape the way I think about dance and the way I use my body and the way I think about putting together a dance. So that is why those things stick out in my brain now, because they kind of, in some ways, have been passed down to me.
All right, I think we might have time for one last question, and I do want to ask you this. And it's coming from the Festival of Kuchipudi that you did recently, and
Sure.
specifically some of the different types of virtual performances that were featured. Um, what do you think are the considerations aesthetically if we're doing group work virtually as opposed to group work in person?
Ooh, challenging question. Considerations. To be honest, in my little experience of working with like virtual performance, it for me the technicalities of like video and space and lighting and like editing, those things like are what take the front, the take precedent when I'm trying to do something in a virtual setting for a group. Like we did kind of you might have seen it. We did like Zoom choreography, which was really challenging. But the choreography came second. The dancing came second. It became about figuring out how to create this image on these boxes and then putting the people and the way they move into place. And so that's, I think, a huge difference for me is like when I'm working in person with a group, it's more about we're here now. How do I use these bodies to create this? But when you're working online, it's like we're in different places. How do we get technology to give the feeling or the imagery, the visualization that I'm trying to convey? And so all the things that I consider as secondary normally, like videography and lighting and whatever costuming, those things come up first because you're working through a film medium, essentially, and those things are what convey more than you doing a full item and videotaping it because you have multiple bodies in different locations. If you're working together in the same location and videoing, and hopefully everyone's vaccinated, um, then you can, yeah, exactly. Then you can, dance it and have the video filming you dancing it. But we were working in different zones of the world, so that becomes the main focus is technology.
All right. With that, thank you so much, Kashi. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
And as always, I love talking to you. We could probably go for another couple hours, but I think we've got to continue on with the festival. So, yeah, thank you so much.
You guys, I hope this was insightful and I appreciate being here. Thank you to IDEA.